Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Sobol Jordan, President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland. Welcome to our second community conversation of 2025. These conversations are a forum to raise awareness and increase engagement on important topics in our community. Each of our voices matters and has the power to create change. Thank you to Ideastream Public Media for moderating today's session, and to WOVU for simulcasting the discussion live on 95.9 FM. Finally, thank you to our community partners for their support. Today's topic is more money for working families, the impact of tax credits. Imagine what an extra $1,000 a year could mean for working families in Ohio. That is the goal of tax credits such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit, tools that put real money back in the hands of working families, helping to improve economic stability in our communities. During today's conversation, you will learn how tax credits can return money to working families, hear about Ohio's proposed $1,000 refundable tax credit, and discover how tax credits can be a tool for long-term economic resilience. We are privileged to have Stephanie Czekalinski as our moderator. Stephanie is an award-winning journalist and deputy editor of news at Ideastream Public Media, covering Cleveland and the northwestern portion of the county. With expertise in healthcare, immigration, the justice system, and government, her reporting has appeared in the National Journal, Atlantic Media, and the Columbus Dispatch. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie to begin today's conversation.
Thank you, Sharon, for the introduction, and thank you to the United Way of Greater Cleveland for hosting these community conversations and inviting me to moderate. Today's conversation will begin with discussion by our panelists and include questions that I've prepared. A public question and answer segment follows at approximately 12:40. Panelists will answer questions from the community, and you can start asking those questions anytime. Don't wait. If you hear something you want to ask a question about, feel free to jump in the chat and or send us a text message to 216-307-5632. We'll make every effort to make sure your question is answered. At this time, I'm happy to introduce our panel of experts. Today, we're joined by Aidan Davis, State Policy Director at the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy in Washington, D.C. Aidan works with states nationwide to advance tax policies that reduce inequality and support working families. Her leadership has shaped key research, including the Institute's flagship report, Who Pays?, a distributional analysis of tax systems in all 50 states. We're also joined by Marci Blue, a senior program officer at Enterprise Community Partners, which oversees the Cuyahoga EITC Coalition. With a deep commitment to equity and hands-on experience connecting families to financial resources, Marci helps ensure tax credits like the EITC are more than just policy. They're a path to opportunity. And also Danielle Sydnor is here. She's the CEO of the Rise Together Innovation Institute. In her role, Danielle drives collaboration and sustainable growth, and her experience in financial services and social justice brings a vital perspective to our discussion. Thank you to the panelists for joining us. I look forward to hearing about your expertise and your perspectives. Both credits, well, we're going to be talking specifically about two credits, the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. And those two tax policies have been used to support working families for decades. The EITC turned 50 this year, and the CTC is pushing 30. It dates to 1997. These initiatives have historically enjoyed bipartisan support with supporters on both sides of the aisle, claiming they alleviate poverty and bolster economic security for families. So let's dive in and talk about what these policies are and who they benefit specifically. Aidan, could you start? Your group studies these policies nationally and at the state level. Could you describe what the EITC and CTC are for us?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So the EITC and Child Tax Credit are credits that are available through the tax system. They are a dollar for dollar reduction of your income tax liability that exists at all levels of government. And I say that because specifically the EITC is available at the federal, state, and local level, existing right now. And what these credits do is they help low and moderate income families make ends meet. And if they're refundable, they can also boost incomes, meaningfully reduce poverty, and create more equitable tax systems. Like you said, the federal EITC has been around for 50 years. It just had its 50th anniversary, the CTC well over 25. And both credits are just really effective at reducing poverty and boosting economic security for families. But that being said, the way they are designed really matters a lot in their ability to meet those goals.
Could you talk a little bit about what the original goals of the policies were and how those have changed over time as they've been redesigned and re-implemented?
Sure, yeah. So both credits at the federal level have changed over the years. For the EITC in particular, it was once designed as a means to boost wages and has since emerged as a really clearly effective anti-poverty tool. And I think both credits have since moved further in that direction in their effectiveness in reducing poverty and also just boosting economic security. I will say specifically at the state level, states have made just really significant strides in recent years, and that's been one of the bigger shifts in terms of developing new credits or expanding existing tax credits. So state level EITCs have been around for decades, but until recently, few states had child tax credits on the books. But notably, when the federal lawmakers expanded the federal child tax credit in 2021, by boosting the per credit amount, by providing monthly payments and full refundability, which ensured that all children, regardless of the earnings of their parents, could benefit, they cut child poverty in half across the country. So it's like a huge development. So states felt that impact and saw just how effective these credits really could be. And then I would say they took up the baton and ran with it. And today, 15 states plus the District of Columbia provide state level child tax credits, and 31 states plus DC have state earned income tax credits.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about what might be coming down in our state specifically in a little bit. But I was hoping before we got started, Marci, your group oversees the Earned Income Tax Credit Coalition, and for 20 years you've been helping taxpayers file and claim credits. I'm hoping you could help us with some definitions before we get too deep in the weeds on tax policy. Can you talk a little bit about what's the difference between a refundable and a non-refundable tax credit?
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so a refundable tax credit really means that taxpayers can actually receive that credit amount as a refund, even if their tax liability kind of goes down to zero, right? So say that I'm, filing my taxes for the year, maybe I owe $100, back to the government, but I qualify for an EITC amount of $1,000. That credit is going to pay off that liability for me, and I'm going to pocket the rest of that money to take home, pay for the expenses that I need to cover, right? Help bridge the gap, as Aidan was saying. For a non-refundable credit, that's really just going to, again, kind of limit that tax liability. So help chip away at what my tax liability is based on my income and other expenses. But it hits that ceiling, right? So it's helping limit that liability. I'm not going to take home any extra that I may qualify for if in fact it works out that way. So the EITC is unique in that way, in that it is refundable. That money is coming back into the pockets of families who we know through our program are using it to cover basic needs, living expenses, things like utility bills, groceries, rental payments, right? So it really does help kind of bridge that gap for lower income families.
Wonderful. And so if your tax liability is zero and then you qualify for the refundable credits, you get that money back. Right?
Exactly.
In a payment. Yeah. Interesting. Who are some of the people that you see typically applying for and receiving this credit? What are their income levels and their family situations? Who qualifies?
Sure. So there is a very detailed explanation of who qualifies for the credit through the IRS, but typically we're looking at people who are working, earning an earned income between the ages of 25 and 64. And there are some additional qualifications on top of that. So you kind of start qualifying for an amount of the credit based on the first dollar you're earning in earned income. That amount starts to rise as income goes a little bit further, as your family size grows. So for families who have multiple children, they're going to kind of get the maximum amount of benefit from that credit. And then it kind of starts to peter down as income grows and gets a little bit higher. So primarily through our program, we're seeing people who are working lower wage jobs, earning below, the threshold of the past year, which was around $67,000, and who may have, a couple of children, depending on their family size, and who are kind of in that working age group, but maybe not meeting the income levels that are needed to be able to really kind of live the full quality of life based on expenses. So that's primarily who we're seeing through the program.
Interesting. Well, we've heard a lot about all of the benefits and things that these programs are associated with. Aidan, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the primary criticisms that are leveled against the EITC and the CTC, and maybe talk about how policy makers can address those issues.
Sure, yeah, I think a lot of it kind of stems around design of programs. So often when you hear criticism of credits, you'll hear things about error rates. And I will say that improper uptake does exist for these credits. And a lot of times it's inadvertent. And a good goal for policymakers would be to simplify the credits, for instance, by making eligibility for benefits more straightforward. But when looking at the broader tax system and considering tax avoidance kind of in a more comprehensive way, which I think is really important to do in that case, the research is really clear that this is more of an issue at the upper end of the income scale. So spending time and resources focused on, for instance, EITC error rates will result in little dollar value and big impacts on families who really need the benefits of low and middle income tax credits. And then to that end, I do think it's like timely right now, because this is actually ramping up right now under the House tax legislation that's moving through the legislature. For the federal EITC in that bill, there's no direct policy changes, but there are a number of new requirements, which, if are passed into law, will result in fewer eligible families who are not at all gaming the system, who will no longer be able to benefit from the federal EITC. And then other types of things that you hear that I think have been very prevalent in the conversation in Ohio is this idea of incentivizing work. And I think the thing there is that there's a need, the argument is that there's a need to not allow the credits to be available at $0 of income, but the child tax credit needs to kind of ramp up. And part of the thing is that I'm sure for a number of folks, there is an amount of money in which, if you came into a lot of money, you would quit your job and do what you need to do or what you want to do, and not necessarily what you need to do to get paid. But I think if you were to go and interview 100 people in Ohio right now, I would wager a bet that none of them would say that $100 or $1,000 is that amount to just walk away from your job. So while it's important policy that will meaningfully help children and families, it's not a dollar figure that's going to determine for someone whether or not they ought to be in the workforce. So in that sense, I view that as more of a solution in search of a problem. And then I will say what ends up happening to that end is instead that the people who you think that you're kind of like targeting with that type of policy, the people who are actually going to get left behind in situations like that are actually much more sympathetic situations than people realize. They're going to be people who are serving as caretakers between jobs, people who are laid off, who are sick or disabled. They're either really young, they have really young children and are unable to afford childcare to work, or they may be grandparents who are well above the typical working age and taking care of young children. So I think these, in reality, these aren't really the people that policymakers think that they're targeting with that sort of policy and that sort of pushback. And then I'll go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was
just going to say the one other is sometimes you'll hear limited impact. And for me, I'm not sure that I fully understand the limited impact argument. In my mind, for a family having trouble making ends meet, every extra dollar goes a long way and is important. And I've once had a state partner tell me that in these tax committees or conversations around tax changes, there are just so many lobbyists, specifically corporate lobbyists, in the rooms around tax debates, they're in the hallways, they're in the rooms, making sure that their voices are heard. And I just think there's a lot more space for people to be taking steps to better support working families and children through the tax code, all means possible.
Certainly. When you said there's criticism regarding improper uptake, that just means, people applying for the tax credit who don't qualify or shouldn't be.
Yeah, I would just say it's
receiving
related to kind of the error rate argument that you often hear.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I know it's kind of a technical term, but it's like the tax gap. It's like, who are people that are getting benefits that maybe shouldn't be receiving benefits? And it really is the case that for the EITC or child tax credit, it's such a small portion of that, when the majority of those problems we see at the upper end of the income scale.
Right. Well, and also this is a tax credit that you don't get unless you apply for it. And so, Marci, I wanted to ask you too, what role do tax preparation services play in making sure that people who are eligible receive those credits appropriately? I don't know if you've got best practices that you can share, but how are we reaching the people that should get that credit?
Sure. So through the Cuyahoga EITC Coalition specifically, we are part of the nationwide IRS VITA program, which is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. So we are partnering directly with the IRS to provide this service. Everyone who is coming through as a volunteer and doing tax preparation is trained and certified through the IRS. So really it is a free, safe, secure option for people to come through and do their filing. And I think what's most important is just thinking about tax compliance in general. When you're coming through to get your, taxes filed, you want to make sure you have all your documentation. You want to make sure you have, IDs up to date. You are claiming the correct dependents and you are the one claiming them, and you've arranged that with maybe another parent or person who may have a right to claim that child. So I think it's just less about kind of applying, because we know that if you, fall within the categories that fall within the EITC guidelines or the CTC guidelines, you will qualify for the credit. But having your most up-to-date real information is going to be most important. So when all of that is taken into account, that credit amount is giving you the maximum benefit that you can get, and that's going to work for your family. So we want to make sure that people are coming in with everything they need, all of the information they need. They've arranged, around dependents, and they have that information at hand, so that at least our our tax preparers are ready to help them file in a very 100% accurate way. And that would go for all preparers, right? There are paid preparers out there. There's self-filing you could do online. But I think there is a level of kind of comfort and safety and accuracy that comes with sitting down with a professional who's been trained to walk through everything with you. We see that a lot at our sites. People want to walk through their documents, explain their situations, make sure that they're doing the right thing and that they have the things that they need in place to file correctly and to receive those credits.
Yeah, I think there's also just a experience kind of thing. It's not the funnest thing in the whole wide world to file your taxes. I guess that's rather universally accepted. Danielle, can you talk? You work directly with communities, mostly in Central Ohio, and your work has been focused on equity, both racial and economic. I'm hoping that you can sort of, in conversation with what Marci was just talking about, talk about opportunities for financial institutions to better support recipients of these credits, because I think there is, or maybe I should ask, do you think there are some barriers to accessing the kind of help that would allow people to who qualify for these credits to take advantage of them?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I think Marci and Ms. Davis laid it out pretty clearly, just about the issues that people face in trying to navigate getting access to these things. And I would just start with like kind of an underlying core issue that our work is focused on, is the impacts of systemic racism and how that drives the narratives and community behaviors and how people navigate and access systems. So we know that we talk about in urban communities, often you have a significant population that are unbanked. And so that means that they don't have existing relationships with financial institutions. And so they're using tools and products like Cash App and other means to be able to access financial services. And so that inherently means they're not interfacing with another human being when they're doing these transactions. And so they don't have that trusted relationship with somebody who can say, hey, have you considered this particular credit that you might be eligible for? And so it's really important that we have organizations like Enterprise that are in the community that can be that trusted human being, that trusted partner that someone can go in and engage with. When we think about what the role of financial institutions, because of things like the Community Reinvestment Act, they do have an obligation to assist in communities by doing things like financial literacy. And so I think that there's an absolute business case for being able to engage with folks that may not be traditionally banked and be able to assist them with establishing a banking relationship as a result of the resources that they're likely to receive, and have the potential to now have a customer for life. My background in finance, we talked a lot about building those sticky relationships. And so our focus at Rise is really to try and shift this narrative that while the moral imperative is what we believe is like the price of admission, everybody should agree that we should do this stuff because it's the right thing to do. But if that doesn't move you enough, there's a significant business case for being able to take advantage of providing access to these types of tools for folks in our community.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about financial institutions trying to develop those relationships with communities where there are a lot of people who are unbanked, and the attractiveness of that. I want to remind everyone who's here on the call, we are taking questions, and our panelists will lend their expertise to your concern or your comment or your question. Drop those in the chat if you're joining via Zoom, but you can also text questions to 216-307-5632. That's 216-307-5632. We would love to put these wonderful experts at your disposal to answer your questions. In September, I want to talk about a study really quickly. The United Way of New Jersey released a policy analysis that argued that the federal poverty level is inadequate in capturing the number of children who live in financial hardship. And it found that half of the children in the United States and 46% of all children in the state of Ohio live in households that struggle to afford basic housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, technology, and taxes. And it calls these households ALICE households. Those are asset limited, income constrained. And I'm hoping, Danielle, that you can talk a little bit about what you see people using these tax credits for in your area, and then also what it can mean in practical terms for children who are growing up in these situations. We're talking about half the kids in our state.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Stephanie, that you raised that point, because we talk about poverty as if it's this really small percentage of the people, or even poverty and financial insecurity. And we think that the expanded definition with the ALICE population, and also that E on there, is like asset limited, income constrained, employed. So most of these people that we're talking about when we give these statistics are folks that are doing exactly what lawmakers say. We want them to go to work, they're working, and still it's not enough. And so that context, I think, is significantly important, that we reinforce that majority of people that we're describing in that population are people who are employed. But what do we see people do with the money? They do the things that most people do with money. They take care of their basic needs. There was a recent report that came out from the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity very recently, and it highlights the fact that 60% of Americans can't afford basic necessities. So more people in our country are in this same population, but we spend a lot of time talking about the populations that are persistently in poverty, or the disproportionate nature of who is in poverty. And what it does is, from a narrative building standpoint, it allows people to believe that it's not as big of an issue as it is. And so when you say, what does it mean to have so many children in our community that are struggling to have access to quality housing, to have access to consistent, reliable food, it means that they're not able to excel in the way that they could. It means that they're being robbed of their future. It means that they're being robbed of their hopes and dreams. It means that we're creating another generation of kids who are likely not going to be able to fully contribute to society. Scioto Analysis, which is a firm that we do work with, did a recent some work for us, and it was estimated to cost Franklin County $5.7 billion in lost economic activity for the rate of childhood poverty that we had in 2023. And so how many lawmakers would want to spend resources to recoup $5.7 billion? And I think that's the argument that we have to make, is like, we're not winning in this scenario. It doesn't do us as a whole collective any better for continuing to relegate a certain population of our community into poverty and poverty wages.
We have a question from the audience that dovetails with what you're talking about there. They're asking about the impacts of these tax credits. And the question is there an opportunity to see whether the EITC recipients have less future child welfare services or a need for them? And is there a link that's been demonstrated between outcomes and these tax credits? I'm not sure. Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the research that we have shows that children and families who receive the child tax credit and earned income tax credit, they experience better health, better school outcomes, and higher long-term earnings. So yes, the data does show that when a family has access to these resources and they're pulled out of financial insecurity, their children do end up better. And I think that just also relates to the data that says that the number of years that a child spends in poverty, that they're more likely to be in poverty as an adult. So if we can help working families, we can help all families that have kids have more resources, we absolutely know the data tells us those kids are less likely to be in poverty as an adult and go back and buy goods and services and contribute in the way that we want to see them.
Wonderful. Interesting. Thank you for the answer to that. And thank you for the question. I hope more people will join us. Drop those questions in the chat or send a text message to 216-307-5632. Your questions really do enrich the discussion. So please join us in this conversation. I want to talk about what's happening in Ohio currently. As of November, Aidan, you said 16 states, when you count DC, offered child tax credits to enhance economic security of families with kids. Ohio's Governor Mike DeWine proposed that Ohio join them in his 2025 budget. This spring, however, the House axed the refundable tax credit that would have given up to $1,000 to families with children younger than 7. Aidan, your institute has analyzed state tax systems across the country with an eye towards who's paying. Your most recent report found Ohio has the 15th most regressive system in the country, and the state was categorized among the more regressive states in the nation. Can you tell us about your findings and what impact this kind of tax structure has on economic equity in the state?
Yeah, absolutely. So our study, Who Pays, is an analysis of state and local tax systems in all 50 states and DC. And in that study, we cover 99.7% of all tax collections across the country. So it's very thorough, no minor feat. Our findings in Ohio show a very clear, almost like a textbook regressive tax system. And what that means is that as a share of income, the highest income individuals in Ohio pay the lowest tax rates, and then lower and middle class, their tax rates are lower than middle class and the working poor across the state. So what that means is that there are just a lot of opportunities for improvement to Ohio's tax system, especially on the very bottom and the very top of the income scale. And for the bottom of the income scale, things like EITCs and child tax credits can go a really long way in helping shift the regressive tax codes. We've seen this play out in a number of states, states that have done the most to kind of move in their rankings and to do more to tax the top and lower tax rates on the very bottom, really employ refundable tax credits and higher taxes on the very top earners. That's just the way that we've seen this really shake out to reach more equitable tax systems. And then one thing about these credits, specifically tax credits, is when you're talking about tax credits and refundable tax credits specifically, what you're saying is that if you, what matters is how much they are paying in income taxes. And if they have no income tax liability, then they're not, with a non-refundable credit, you're not receiving that amount back as a refund. But I think the important thing to remember is that we're not just looking at income taxes ever. We all pay all kinds of taxes. We pay property taxes, sales taxes, gas taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And so all those families that are paying all of those different types of taxes, even if they're not paying into the income tax, are still paying incredibly high regressive taxes through other types of taxes. So what refundable credits can do is really offset that for low and middle income families.
I was struck by one of the findings, well, the findings in your report. It said that the lowest 20% of Ohio taxpayers in family income paid 12.7% of their income in state and local taxes. The top 1% paid 6.3%. And so that gives you an idea about what she's talking about in terms of, that increased burden on people who are earning less. Marci, I hope you could talk a little bit about some of the missed opportunities that people, when they do their taxes, they leave this money on the table. What are some of the most common questions and misunderstandings that you encounter from clients regarding these tax credits?
Sure. I think, we hear a lot of different things. I'll try to focus on some of the more common issues that we come across. I think in general, there's a fear of the IRS and the tax system itself, and what does it mean if I file? Does that mean I'm on the radar for something? And of course, in today's climate, that's even more important than ever. So I think there's just a general level of distrust that comes along. We offer multiple years of return prep. So we do see clients who come in who haven't filed maybe for the past 3 or 4 years, and we're helping them catch up and get compliant and file up to the point that we see them. So we do tend to see that. And with the EITC in particular, you can receive it, 3 years kind of retroactively. So it's important that people know if they do come in to file, previous years, some of that credit could be coming back to them if they qualify. So just in general, kind of staying up to date and tax compliant in terms of filing is important when you think about receiving those credits. I think also just lack of documentation. We want to make sure that people understand that you're including all of your W-2s. We tend to see a lot of gig workers, people who maybe have multiple part-time jobs, driving for ride shares, staying on top of mileage expenses, things like that are going to be, more of a benefit when you're reporting back in that filing to help you maximize the credits you may be receiving. So issues like that. Of course, when you think about the child tax credit and claiming dependents, again, want to make sure people understand that the year that your child turns 17 is the year that you're no longer receiving that credit. So if it's something you're really counting on and is a core piece of your family's income, staying on top of that and understanding what those other dependent types of credits look like as well. So making sure that, as you're claiming dependents, as you're coordinating with families, there's some coordination there and really paying attention to the age of the child and kind of how that's going to impact your refund at the end of the year. And then I would say just in general, the IRS changes things all the time. There's always something, new coming around. We try to stay on top of that as much as possible through our training so that everyone who's out in the community working with taxpayers is helping them answer questions, work through issues that are, coming up within the tax season. So we can help combat some of that confusion when things change in the tax code and when things change around filing. So we do our best to stay up to date and make sure our sites are up to date as well to help people work through any of those issues.
We have another great question from the audience. In Cuyahoga County and or Ohio, how many dollars are not claimed that could be claimed by families and how much is claimed? So they're asking, who's missing out and how much are they missing out on? Marci, maybe you can help with that one.
Sure. I don't have a perfect answer. I can tell you that for the county, I'll use our most recent tax season as an example. So we filed around 10,000, we met around 10,000 clients in doing 10,000 filings just through the tax season. The total refund amount was over $11.7 million. And of that, 3.25 million was EITC refunds, and then a little over 2 million for child tax credit. So we're seeing, that 20 to 30% kind of range in there for who's filing at the county level. I can't speak to the state level. Maybe Aidan has data there, but we do know that there is a gap. There are some people out there who qualify that just either are not filing and have a different behavior there.
Marci, I would add, I know in Franklin County, we estimated there's like 24,000 households that were eligible that did not actually apply. And so it'd be about $62 million if they got the average type of return. So it's millions of dollars that ultimately are not coming back into the state that could be dollars to be used on local goods and services and to help lift our families out of the financial situations that they're in.
I think that's a really important point, Danielle. We haven't talked about these tax credits as potential economic stimulus. Aidan, maybe you could talk about that, particularly in local economies or for small businesses. Are you seeing? Has your research? What is the economic impact that your research has found?
Yeah, I think some of this has already been said. I know Marci touched on this. But the research is just really clear that low and middle income households with the expanded credits, particularly in 2021, which is like one of the best data points for researchers, just showed that that boost in the federal credit was spent on housing, food, clothing. And it's just a testament to how vital an expanded child tax credit is to helping families make ends meet, and just how important that extra income boost is to so many families. And the other thing I would just say about that is like a little financial breathing room can just go a really long way in creating a healthy environment for kids to grow up in. I know Danielle said this, but like I just cannot stress enough, the research just overwhelmingly shows that income boosts in the home through things like child tax credits reduce the likelihood of major hardships, such as an inability to afford adequate food or shelter. Like these are major life changing things that are so important to the stability and upbringing of kids. And so like those types of insecurities at a young age really hinder children's educational health and future economic outcomes. So we're talking about a long game here. Like these are the kids that are going to be running our country someday, and we need to give them the very best possible ability to have the growth and the stability that they need to have good lives. And because if you're able to get more income into the homes at an early age, you just know that you're going to have better outcomes over the long run. And that has this effect that goes out across the community. Like that's going to help businesses have a better workforce. It's going to have more educated people like all through the country. There's just so many benefits that kind of stem from that are just vital for our country to just have success.
We're entering into our Q&A section. So thank you, Aidan, for that. But I want to remind folks, now's your opportunity to text questions if you'd like, 216-307-5632, or type them into the Q&A box if you're joining us via Zoom. We welcome those questions from anywhere in the community. Do you have something that you've been dying to know about these tax credits and the communities that they affect? This is your opportunity. You've got a panel of experts here who are at your disposal. So please, that number again is 216-307-5632. Danielle, you had talked about this a little briefly, but I was hoping that you could talk about whether or not these tax credits affect different demographic groups differently. Are you seeing different impacts in different marginalized communities, or are you seeing disparities in terms of access and benefits?
Yeah. So I think the impact that we see in marginalized communities is that disproportionately, again, Black residents and Latino residents experience poverty at higher rates than the rest of the community overall. Even with them experiencing poverty at higher rates, specifically in Franklin County, the majority of people who are experiencing poverty in Franklin County are white. And so we look at these as like interventions that actually help everybody, even though we know certain portions of our community experience these issues at a higher rate. But because of that, again, something that, Marci talked about the ways that people access this and whether or not they trust being able to, the IRS, when you have historical issues with the systems overall, that means that these same populations who are disproportionately likely experiencing poverty and disproportionately would be eligible for these tools also don't trust the systems that are designed to provide them relief. And so that means that they're not coming to get access to the resources. And they're also, we have folks that have been audited, or they have improper tax preparers who target them to take advantage of them to qualify for these things and do all types of things that are not legal. And so I think it is, again, incumbent upon us to think about it, how it's a community-wide solution to ensure that especially folks in our marginalized communities get access to the right kinds of tax preparers to get this relief, because we know that they're more likely to be struggling, especially single mother-led households. We know is a significant demographic of people who experience financial insecurity at higher levels, and so would be more likely to be eligible for EITC and others.
Thank you. That's wonderful. We have some questions coming in from the audience that I want to get to. Aidan, an audience member is asking about state trends across the country. They write, are there states like Ohio that have adopted refundable child tax credits? Can you talk about what's happening on the state level, but nationally?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the specific details right in front of me, but you should look at our website, itep.org. We have recent briefs that update when the different years that states have made these changes and added these policies in their states. But I will say, over the time that we've been following this trend, which has been for a very long time, the majority of state level child tax credits have come into existence really over the past 5 years. And that's largely a result of the incredible success of the federal child tax credit in the boost. And what states have done is they've largely not coupled directly to the federal definition, like the way that the federal credit is designed. And that's largely because it's a great credit. It's doing a lot to improve lives for people, but it also has flaws that states recognize and they want to improve upon. And that's often the way that we see state policy play out. Like, it's kind of build on what the federal tax code is doing and improve it. And so with the specifically with the child tax credit, though, one of the key ways that states have changed the way that they've designed the credits is that they've made sure that they're available to all family, regardless of earnings. That's been one of the core things that's been similar across state child tax credits that have been taken up in recent years. And then there's been a big range in the size and the scale of the credits. Some credits are available all the way up to 18 years old. A lot of states have focused, I think, for cost reasons, specifically on a really vulnerable population, which is that 6 and under, which is more in line with what Ohio's governor has proposed. And there's research to back up why that's a really important population to be focused on. But then there's 5 states, I think, at this point that do have maximum credits that are $1,000 or more. So states are really taking this to the next level because they see just how valuable and how important it is, and how it's able to really boost economic security for people and change the lives of their residents.
We have another wonderful question from the audience. Do our community members need to file through a certain agency website, or is this all included through free programs like Free Tax USA that they can do on their own? So they're asking about home filers or individual filers who are doing it on their own. Marci, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this works practically.
Yeah, for sure. So, you do not have to go through the EITC coalition site to file your taxes in order to receive that credit. There are other, avenues out there, and we like to frame our program. We are an option, right? There may be families who have really complex tax situations where it does make sense to go to a paid preparer, or if you're, very technology adept, to use online filing, and that is all out there. So My Free Taxes is a great option to be able to file online. There are other options out there that come at no cost, some, at a lower cost, and some higher. So it kind of just depends on the situation. And I'll say that, the VITA program through the IRS, so we do have certain limitations. There are things that are out of scope for our program. So again, those more specifically high earners, but also more complex tax situations, those would require either going through self-filing or to a paid preparer. But yeah, the other options are out there. It does not mean that you're not able to get the credit if you're not going through a program like ours.
The secret for people who are filing on their own is knowing that they qualify. Yeah. And then they can do it. They can do it on their own behalf. We have another wonderful question. Maybe Danielle, you could help with this one. Have you been able to do research about how to best get the message out to families to increase the uptake of those filing and claiming their return? And how can people help spread the word?
Yeah, we have not done any specific research, but I will share from the perspective of work that I've done, especially at the NAACP, when we think about community organizing. And I look at this very similarly, that you have to have trusted messengers to get to populations in our community that we would call hardest to reach when you're trying to do any type of community engagement. And so, again, having organizations like Enterprise and the VITA Network and all of the other folks who are doing tax preparation, it's important that those organizations have members from the community that the community trusts as a voice to be able to help connect them with resources and quell those concerns about, is this legal? It sounds too good to be true. How is it possible the IRS is going to give me money if I don't owe any taxes? And be able to do that kind of awareness and campaign building before it's tax time. And I really stress that, because once we're already into tax preparation season, people want a quick solution. And so we have to be doing these kinds of forums. Why this is so important is now everybody that's listening today can go out and talk to people that they know. And that's really how you build that groundswell of people who feel comfortable now going and sitting down and talking to a tax professional.
Yeah, about trust, especially when you're dealing with your finances. It's all about trust. They have some more policy questions coming in. Aidan, how would the bill in the U.S. House affect federal child tax credits, and how many families and children would be excluded if those changes are made? I know you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's a mishmash of a lot of things in the House tax plan. Our team at ITEP is working to model the full plan, and so I think that information will be valuable when it's available, which should be in the coming days. But the JCT analysis, which is the Congress's Joint Committee on Taxation, did score the bill, and I think the takeaways from that are pretty helpful, because it shows overall, like when you look at the whole tax plan, I always like to look at the big picture and then take a step back. The plan is regressive, meaning again that it would offer the largest tax cuts as a share of income to high earning taxpayers than either to middle class or working class families. It also makes clear that most of those tax cuts would go to families with above average incomes. But then when looking specifically at the credit changes, the federal child tax credit would temporarily increase to $2,500 per child for families who qualify for the full amount. And that's up from the $2,000 maximum credit that currently exists. So an important boost, of course. But there are a couple of things to know about the enhancement. That boosted amount is slightly below its inflation adjusted value at the start of 2018, when the $2,000 credit first took effect. So it's arguably getting us back to where the credit should have been. But then most problematic, I would say the bill does nothing for the 17 million children who are currently left out of the full federal child tax credit because their parents' earnings are too low. And that's 1 in 4 American children. And then it also goes further to exclude 4.5 million citizen children because their parents are immigrants. So there's a lot of flaws, I would say, under this bill and the design of the child tax credit. So those, and also those 20 million plus children that would be left out are in the same families that risk losing Medicaid or SNAP or facing much higher health care and food costs under this legislation. So those are kind of the big takeaways around the federal CTC conversations that are currently taking place.
Yeah, those are some big policy changes. Thank you for that. I do want to let you know we have about 10 minutes remaining. This is your opportunity to ask our panelists any question that you would like about tax policy. It's a wonderful opportunity. Text your questions to 216-307-5632. Those questions really enrich the conversation and we appreciate them. Or type them in the Q&A box if you're joining us via Zoom. I did want to talk a little bit about the expansions that happened under the pandemic. during the pandemic. In hindsight, that sort of provides us an interesting experiment in fighting poverty, and as safety net programs in general were expanded. Danielle, specifically for you, I was wondering if you saw an impact of the temporary expansions of those of the specifically the child tax credit during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you saw those having an impact on families, and if so, what it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple really big things jumped out. The temporary relief provided by the expanded child tax credit during the pandemic provided 1.2 million families in Ohio an average payment of $435 a month for 6 months. And so when we think about what that means, is that they were able to do things like pay the rent, put gas in their car, buy groceries, and it also caused childhood poverty to go to a record low of 5.2% in 2021. So, I mean, it's like, I think, again, basic math, right? You have expenses and you have income. And so when we provided families more income, that meant more kids in our community were no longer in households that were experiencing poverty. And those families did the things. We have one mom that was quoted saying the child tax credit was tremendous because it helped them pay for preschool for their 2 kids under 5. And so we want families to get back to work. And so they got to pay for childcare. And so we say, where does the money come from? And so we can either put those resources directly into the hands of the adults to make those decisions for their family. And something like the child tax credit is a phenomenal way to do that.
Aidan, are you hearing any or what conversation you might be hearing among policy experts about making some of those expansions permanent or future changes in that regard?
I definitely think there's a continued push and a desire for that to be the case. I think under the current legislation and the conversations that are taking place in today's Congress, that doesn't seem to be a top priority.
Thank you. Wonderful. One more question, Marci, as we're wrapping up. I want to talk about the impact of technology. Danielle has stressed the importance of trust, especially when tax preparers are working with people in the community to make sure they understand what tax credits they qualify for. Could you talk a little bit about how technology and innovation in financial services might be leveraged to improve the deliverability and accessibility of these tax credits? You talked a lot about making sure you have all the documents you need, but is there a way to reduce friction and make this whole thing just more pleasant, easy, more accessible?
Sure, there's always ways to make it more pleasant, easy, and accessible. I think it's kind of twofold. I think on the side of the government and those systems that we are directly reliant on, we are relying on their technology, their processes, how they are sharing information with taxpayers. Specifically thinking about if I need to go back and find my Social Security number, or something that I need to retrieve from the government. Those systems have not always been flawless, and that communication chain can sometimes take a while. So I think a greater, awareness building campaign to the community around filing in general. Danielle was speaking to that earlier. What does it mean to file? What documentation do I need? Who should be filing? And how do I interact with, institutions like the IRS, like the Social Security office, in a way that makes people feel safe, and that they understand kind of what the purpose is for, again, getting their kind of documentation, their effects in order. I think there's still some trust building to be done there on the system side. But then I also just think, we see people of all ages, of all technical capabilities coming in for tax preparation. And it can be as simple as someone not knowing how to pull up their W-2 on their phone versus having it printed, right? So just, I think, general technical kind of capabilities across the board, especially for the aging population. We do see a lot of older adults coming in, and there's some definite kind of teaching and hand-holding that has to be done when it comes to helping them, get their stuff in order. So I think it's kind of on both sides, and definitely with the, accessibility now of online filing tools. There are even, calculators online that you can go in if you want to see if you might qualify for the EITC or the CTC, input your information, get a little, blurb about how much you might qualify for. That's great awareness building as well, because people who aren't even aware, or maybe who are, afraid to file for whatever reason, might see, oh, actually based on my income, my job, my family size, I could be taking home a couple $1,000s, and that's really powerful. So technology definitely comes into play, but I think we see with our clients, it kind of runs the gamut, and we want to make sure that we're meeting them where they are with the tools that we have.
Wonderful, thank you. One more final question from the audience, another great one. How would these credits directly impact the ALICE population? And the ALICE population are those folks that aren't living in poverty, but they are living in hardship. Things are difficult. I'm not sure who would like to take this one. Aidan, Danielle, anybody want to jump in? Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same, you're, if someone is eligible for the credit, it's going to be determined by their income and their, household size. And so many of the families in the ALICE population would be individuals who would qualify for the credit, because even though they're employed, and that's the especially for the earned income tax credit, that's a part of the prerequisite, is that you do have earnings. And then the child tax credit, being able to identify, again, depending upon what the state does with the final, what that might look like, it would impact families that are in that same bucket. But I would just reinforce that we need our folks that are listening to this to help us talk to lawmakers about the fact that these are things that we support. And I know in Ohio, the expanded child tax credit that the governor had in the budget was stripped out of the House side of the legislation. We're really calling on lawmakers in the Senate to consider putting that back in. And so there's a rally on June the 17th from noon to 1 at the Ohio State House on the West Lawn to just urge lawmakers to put it back into the budget, so that way we can see what it does. And so instead of us talking about this hypothetically, we'll be able to say, as a result of the decision, here's how families were impacted, and maybe we do look at it, a further expansion.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you to all the audience members. We're wrapping up. We're out of time, unfortunately. The questions have been wonderful. I also want to thank our panelists this afternoon. I hope you found their insights as compelling as I did. Thank you too to the United Way for hosting this discussion. It's such an important topic. And thank you everyone once again for joining us and contributing to the conversation. I'm Stephanie Czekalinski. I'm a deputy editor of news at Ideastream Public Media. And on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Stephanie, for moderating today's discussion, and to Aidan, Marci, and Danielle for an engaging and informative conversation on the impact of tax credits on working families. Thank you to Ideastream Public Media and WOVU 95.9 FM, who live streamed today's conversation. Finally, thank you for joining us today and lending your voices on this important topic. Information on our next panel discussions will be available on United Way's website at unitedwaycleveland.org. All community conversation events are complimentary and open to the public. And remember, if you need assistance and do not know where to turn, please call 211. Thank you for being with us today, and have a great afternoon.